everybody. Anyway, I wanted to do a video on Pagan perfect deities. Somebody a while back had put a comment on one of my videos saying that, because I made a comment about how pagans don't believe in perfect deities, that they believe in a perfect Celtic goddess. And I thought that was kind of weird because, more than one goddess, more than one god, why would a perfect being need companions to do other things for them in the universe? It doesn't really make much sense. But I wanted to go through some of the ideas of perfect beings and some of the arguments for a perfect being, and then talk about my idea of what makes up a good idea, a good spiritual notion about God. So, to start off, I wanted to talk about what it is to be perfect. Obviously, we have this idea of a perfect deity would be a deity that not only was perfect, but obviously anything it would create would also be perfect. But we know that nature is not perfect. Therefore, it doesn't make much sense to me that a god that's specifically tied to nature would be considered perfect. I couldn't find any pagan arguments for perfect deities, or any pagan language saying that a god was matter-of-factly perfect. I couldn't find that. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because obviously our records on what exactly went on back then isn't completely contextual. A lot of things were oral and things like that, but regardless, especially for someone who is a reconstructionist like this person was, I find it quite odd that they would rely on this perfect notion of deity. It must only come from an emotional place. And I'll explain that later. The idea that, a God would be perfect would mean that God would be, first of all, nothing could ever kill it, because you can't kill something that's perfect, because it would, then be imperfect and subjected to something. So therefore, a perfect deity could not be subjected to the laws of time and space and things like that. But our gods, mostly, and especially this person's gods, are tied to nature and specific parts of nature, because as the Celtic gods normally are, would obviously be tied to specific aspects of space and time. Why would someone worship a solar calendar, worship around a solar calendar with, the 4 major Celtic holidays, if their gods were not subject to the laws of time? Doesn't make much sense. Besides the fact that mythology goes on to suggest that gods are very much subject to the laws of time. Not just Celtic mythology, but, for me, I know the Greek mythology better, and I'll give you an example from Greek mythology. Demeter lost her daughter Persephone to Hades, who took her down to the underworld. And Persephone, in just two different versions of the story, but the one that I believe is that she ate some pomegranate seeds because she was hungry and therefore was forced to stay there for 6 months out of the year. That 6 months was agony to Demeter. And because of that agony, she caused the world to be, barren and cold during that time. And so, hence we have seasons. This is a story that's very much subjected to the laws of time. Obviously, if gods weren't subjected to the laws of time, it wouldn't make much sense that she would be in such agony over this 6-month period. Now, granted, that's not a Celtic story. I don't know the Celts as well. But for the most part, I think you could find, especially being with the mythology around the holidays and stuff like that, with the solar holidays, that these gods very much are subject to the laws of time, and therefore could not be perfect, because a perfect god would be impervious to time. A perfect god being impervious to time would then therefore be timeless, and it would have existed before the universe existed, and therefore would exist outside of the universe. Therefore, it could not be subject to the laws of time and space. And if that were so, then it wouldn't be possible for them to be tied to things within this universe if they only existed outside of the universe. Yet again, now we get into the whole idea of abstracts, which kind of reminds me of Plato. Plato had this idea of these abstract notions that were perfect things that existed outside of the universe, were discoverable, but not existing in the universe in a perfect state. For example, we cannot draw a perfect circle, but we know what the perfect circle looks like. And so, for that, we could see a perfect deity existing outside of our universe, but not a perfect deity that exists within the universe, like pagan deities do. Perhaps that's an argument for a different type of god, but there's other arguments for the existence of perfect deities that I wanted to go through. I could not find any pagan ones. The first existing argument that I could find for perfection in deity came from St. Anselm, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He had this argument quite popularly known as the greatest conceivable being argument, and it kind of goes a little bit like this. One can conceive of the greatest conceivable being because the thought of the greatest conceivable being exists in the mind. If a greatest conceivable being existed in reality, it would then be greater than the greatest conceivable being in your mind, because existence would make it greater. Therefore, the greatest conceivable being in your mind cannot be the greatest conceivable being. Therefore, the greatest conceivable being, since we can imagine it, must exist in the universe itself. Kind of a little bit of a mind-twisting little dance there, isn't it? I personally think that argument's hogwash, and Hume just rips it apart. Okay? But regardless, we can see how this itself would not really apply to pagan deities. Besides the fact that pagan deities, obviously are one in many pantheon, and therefore, why would a perfect deity need helpers or need other people to do other parts of things in the universe for them? But also, if you had a perfect deity, what happens to this balance in nature that most pagans hold so dear? This whole balance of the light and the dark that we see in just about every pagan culture, Celtic and Greek alike. So just try to wrap my mind around that. If you believe in perfect deities, please give me a message, leave a comment, tell me why. Here's what I think. Okay, I said I was going to wrap it up with what I think is a good, healthy idea of God, okay, or idea of deity. I myself believe in, the Olympians. I believe in the Greek pagan deity. And I came to that knowledge not just through an a priori argument like Anselm had, which a priori means before experience. His argument is what we call an ontological argument, or an argument from logic. Besides just having that logical side, which, logic is air, we would also have that fire, that experience. We would also have that intuition, or that feeling, which I said, before, that the idea of a perfect being in a pagan culture must only come from the heart, because there's really not any logic or experience to back it up. And lastly, it has to be tied to science. That's right. I don't believe that our concept of deity should disagree with modern science at all. Because if we can find it to be truth in this universe, then it shouldn't be a truth that doesn't coincide with our deity. And so, science is the search for truth. So, that's my idea, and I want to know what you guys think. Post your comments, post your, video responses and stuff like that. If you believe in a perfect deity and you're pagan, please tell me how it is that you come to that logical conclusion.